About the Yankee team after 5-5. I know it's way too small of a sample size to read too much into it, but they lose to the Orioles again. They haven't hit a lot. The bottom of the order offensively, you got to wonder about. Before I get specific, give me a couple little thumbnails. What have you seen out of the Yankees the first 10 days of the season? Go ahead.
A lot of vacant at-bats, Chris. We can give the numbers: 30 runs in 10 games, hitting with runners in scoring position under 200. And one thing, for instance, on Sunday that jumped out to me when they were shut out, they had 9 at-bats that ended in 1 or 2 pitches. And you say to yourself, well, if you're being aggressive and you see a pitch that you can hit, go after it. Well, of those 9 at-bats, only 1 resulted in a hit. So that, to me, speaks of a team that's a little desperate, a little panicky, understanding that they're trying perhaps to do too much offensively. And then I even look at an at-bat in the 4th inning. Gleyber Torres is hitting 4th for the Yankees. It's a 0-0 game. LeMahieu leads off with a single, and Gleyber tries to bunt. Chris, he's not a bunter. He's
right.
Not. He should not be bunting in that situation. He should be trying to get LeMahieu home or get LeMahieu to third, because Higashioka, Kiner Falefa, and LeCastro are the next 3 hitters. So again, I think in their own way, some of these players are putting a little too much pressure on themselves. And I think we're seeing the results of that. But you also said it before you asked the question. They've played 10 games. It's about 6% of the season. Do I think Judge is going to hit 1 homer every 10 games and finish with 16 this year? No. Do I think that Donaldson's going to hit 200 all year? No. But the 10 games are what we have to evaluate. And when you evaluate that team right now, the offense is a big problem.
Do you think the Yankees gave Judge a fair offer, and were you surprised that he said no?
Yes and yes. I do think, Chris, when you look at the landscape of what players who are approaching free agency, and Aaron would be 31 next year. He will turn 31 in April of next year. And how many years are you taking him to? The Yankees were taking him to his age 38 season, over $30 million a year, a 7-year extension. I talked to people around baseball. This isn't just me, a guy who works for the Yes Network, saying this. I've talked to people around baseball who classified that as a very fair offer. But, Chris, we're not Aaron Judge. He has to be comfortable with it. He knows what he believes his value is, and he believes that his value was higher. And so he has bet on himself for this season. And he may end up coming out a winner. He may end up exceeding the $213 or $214 million extension that the Yankees put out there. But had he signed that deal, Chris, I don't think there would be anyone in baseball who would say, wow, can't believe Judge took that deal. I mean, Jose Ramirez, I know it's a different market in Cleveland, but it just signed for, $80, $90 million less than that a few days earlier. He's a darn good player, Jose Ramirez.
Yes,
so
he is.
If you look at the hardware he has, probably you could even put him on Judge's level. So I was surprised. We'll see what happens in the future if these two sides find their way back to each other.
And what does he miss? 37% of his games in the last 3 or 4 years? Is that the percentage there, Jack? So he's got to stay healthy.
Right, and that has to be a factor, Chris. I mean, he played 148 last year, but he's had seasons of 102, 112. And even though some of those were not mileage on your body injuries, some of those were injuries that he didn't have, get hit by a pitch or something like that. You don't control that. It still goes down on your resume as games missed.
I think it's a problem. I was surprised, too. Plus, he told everybody he wanted to be a Yankee, and the Yankees trying to make that happen. What's the matter with Torres there, Jack? I mean, 2 years ago, he was one of the better young players in the league. Now, even at second base, he made a terrible throw the other night from second. His defense is not great, and he doesn't hit. Well, I mean, he showed you a few thoughts that maybe he was breaking out of it in a couple of other years near the end of the season. But why is Gleyber Torres right now a shell of what he used to be as a player?
It is a great mystery, Chris, and I wish I had the answer, because obviously the Yankees don't have the answer either. If you go back to his 38-homer season, we all look at these projections, and there's one projection called ZiPS projections. They had Torres, after that 38-homer season, his next 4 years, he was being predicted to hit 40-plus homers 4 straight years. I mean, you're putting him in a pantheon of great young players when you talk about that. And as you said, Chris, I mean, the power has just fallen off. The struggles at shortstop, I think, impacted him last year. He hit way too many ground balls last year. And I think that sometimes he gets in his own way. I've heard Paul O'Neill, and I'll reference him again, when he talks about Torres, saying about taking that two-strike approach where you're thinking about doing less. And that when Torres does that, he often hits the ball the opposite way, hits the ball to right field or right center, and that's the player that the Yankees need him to be. But when you start off your career and hit 20-plus homers as a 21-year-old, come back with 38 as a 22-year-old, this has been a precipitous drop, and I think it's something that the Yankees have to hope gets fixed and gets fixed very soon.
Yeah, I'm not sure. He could be going away as Sanchez in a lot of ways. Those two guys who they thought were the stalwarts, young players and everything else, and you wonder where they are. Garrett Cole, you think that he is, listen, I mean, he pitched pretty well against Tampa a couple of years ago in Game 5. He's had his great moments last year, not so good in the wild card round. He gets a little uptight, the sticky stuff. Would the Yankees do that deal again? Would they ask for a mulligan, $334 million?
That's a great question, Chris. I think they'd do it again. I still think that they believe Garrett Cole is one of the premier pitchers in Major League Baseball, and they needed an ace at the top of their rotation. And if you look at his numbers as a Yankee and you put them up against the rest of the pitchers in the American League during that time frame, he's in the top 3 or maybe the top 5, but I definitely think he's up there. I look at last year, the wild card game against the Red Sox. He's never brought it up. He's never made an excuse, but I do think his hamstring was bothering him.
It was hurt.
We were doing the game in Stamford, and Buck Showalter, who obviously is now managing the Mets and doing very well there, he was in the studio with us, and he noticed that Cole was off from that first inning on, just by the way Cole was landing. So you use the word mulligan, even though it's a wild card game that ended their season. I'm kind of not grading Cole on that one loss as devastating as it was because it ended their season. But he needs to be the guy at the front of the rotation who makes the Yankees believe they can get to October and be a damaging team, be a devastating team. So there has to be that dominance from Cole.
Hasn't been that in a little bit. Jack Curry, we'll let him go here in a sec. Has Cashman been here too long as a Yankee general manager?
That's a loaded question.
He's an excellent GM, but it is 22 years. Is that too long?
I think that Brian Cashman has done an amazing job with the Yankees. And Chris, you are, I know your show is national, but you live in Connecticut. You know the New York market as well as anyone. Look around at what other New York teams have done during the time where the Yankees have continually made the playoffs year after year after year. There is something to be said for being a perennial postseason team. Now, with that being said, I think Brian Cashman himself would say not having a World Series title since 2009 is unacceptable. He was raised under the stewardship and the ownership of George Steinbrenner, and we know that George Steinbrenner would have said the same thing. You have to figure out a way to win. But I know how hard that job is. I know how hard Brian Cashman and the rest of the people in the front office work. I would never be the one to say on a radio station, oh, someone has overstayed his welcome or someone deserves to go. I think he does a terrific job with the Yankees, and I think they've put together a team this year that they've bet on. Using Brian's words, he said, we've made some bets. Let's see how they turn out. Well, those bets were on Donaldson and Kiner Falefa and Rizzo and Higashioka behind the plate. So they made all those decisions, and now we see how they will play out in 2022.
What is your take? I haven't heard you talk about this. What's your take on where we stand in the sport right now with the man on second base still, the extra team in each league in the postseason? The DH doesn't affect you, but that as well. The shifts, it sounds like next year they're going to get off it. What's your take right now on where baseball sits in the American lexicon? What's your feel?
Chris, I was always for a universal DH, so I'm actually glad that we see that across the baseball landscape now. I never enjoyed watching pitchers hit. The runner on second base, and I know I'm not the first to say this, I wish that we would play 2 clean innings. Let's get through the 10th and the 11th. And if you get through the 12th inning and no one has scored yet, how about you introduce the extra runner, the extra inning runner, or designated runner, whatever you want to call him then. I don't know if you said pitch clock. I'm a fan of pitch clock. I forgot if that was one of the things you said. Right. As far as the shift goes, I've seen some wonderful arguments for banning the shift. Theo Epstein did an interview with The Athletic where he talked about if you have the infielders 2 on each side of the bag, that allows them to show off their athleticism. We're missing that in the sport. We're missing some of that. But, Chris, I fall on the side of if someone is shifting against you and has installed a defense against you, it's incumbent upon you as the offensive team and the offensive player to figure out a way to beat that shift.
I agree.
I've never thought that let's get rid of the shift. That's the solution to all of this. I've thought adjusting as a hitter is the solution to it. And I know hitting 98-mile-per-hour two-seamers that are tailing away from you, and now you're trying to hit it to the opposite side that you don't normally hit to. I know that's an amazingly difficult thing to do, but Ted Williams figured out how to do it. Other hitters have figured out ways to do it. I don't like suddenly punishing the defense for having done a good job.
Nobody tells Belichick that he's got to rush or play a 4-3 defense.
Yes.